very likely again that we are going to have snap elections again. We've been having this cycle, 5 years, 3 elections, each time producing a change of government. So this is what the criticism, this is where the criticism is directed, because somehow politicians will always find that money to engage, to hold elections. And that money is far much more than the money they invest in such critical situations like alleviating the drought situation. And then when they do that, some would say they do that out of the knowledge that the UN, other development partners will always feel the moral responsibility to say we cannot allow people to starve. But the politicians themselves, they are not taking charge of the situation. And this is where the real issue was, to say then, given that you are aware of such situations, is there any scope when you engage with them to say this is where the priorities should be instead of this?
I think that there are limitations to what we can say. Okay, if you're talking about the government being responsible for citizenry, which is true, that is a question that the citizens themselves need to send back to government, because in the end the citizens are electing the government, they are voting them in, and so there must be an accountability system whereby the citizens should be able to raise issues and ask about the priority setting. That is one. Now the second one is, as United Nations, we are not a political actor in the country, and some of the questions that you are asking are related to the politics of the land, and I think these are questions to be put to the politicians, because they also speak to their accountability, as they said. But I think that the difficult or the dilemma is that irrespective of who is responsible for a situation, for example, elections, if those elections have generated situations where, let's say, there's need to support the population, I think it is still it only makes sense to support the population, and perhaps in parallel put in place the accountability mechanism that would put the politicians and the governments in front of their own responsibilities.
Thank you very much.
Okay, you mentioned, maybe to take you back a bit, you mentioned the involvement of men in issues to do with mitigation of abuse of women and children. How is this worked out really? How is the men responded to this call?
Okay, I think that there are several categories of men. There are the ones that you would call the perpetrators, and the perpetrators are normally being taken to justice. Therefore, the role that UN and NGOs and stakeholders play is to facilitate access to the justice system for the victims. So is to utilize a victims based approach. That is one. Then secondly, the second category of men are the men in general, who have probably nothing to do with that, but who don't have the information, who don't know. And usually the men who don't know appreciate the information, and they understand. But there's also a third category of men, at least as far as Lesotho is concerned. It may compare to other countries, but let me focus on Lesotho. There are also people who are convinced that certain practices are not questionable. For example, wife beating, or beating children, or I don't know. The examples could be many. So those are harder to convince, because they are in the name of a cultural practice or a cultural belief. They understand that this is normal. So this is normal for a man to do that, and those need much longer and much, how can I say that, far-reaching interventions, because they need education to change culture. And as you know, culture is not something that you change in one sitting. You sit down with somebody and by the time we finish, they've been converted, quote unquote. No, it's something that you need to look at, and you need to look at the drivers, you need to look at what is the most appropriate way of addressing them, because confronting, and I mean being confrontational is not necessarily the most productive way. So there's also, there are techniques to raise awareness and to encourage people to question their own behaviors and also understand the perspective of the others. So, but in general, the men that are being targeted, they don't have a label on the forehead that they are in this or the other. And so we also have to find strategies to somehow cast the net a little wide to try to capture and reach all of them with messaging. And messaging also can be utilized in different packages. You are communication experts, you know that better than me. You can use the drama, you can use a variety of channels to convey messages. So, but the answer is these issues are much more complicated and much more complex than they look. So it's not something that we can change in a snap of fingers.
Okay, maybe lastly, we have seen the justice delivery system of the country. I mean, it's in shambles. It has been in shambles for a long time. We've seen the former Chief Justice he's been suspended. We have another one who's facing impeachment. Then we have issues that are questionable practices in the justice delivery system, where you see a whole minister who has raped a child, goes to court, then negotiates himself out of the court system. What do you think is the implication of such practices on the developmental efforts of the country?
That is very simple. In each democracy, and I think I have had an opportunity to mention that on another opportunity, in each democracy you have to have a separation of powers, and you have to also have in place checks and balances. The three powers, the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary, have to be separate. But separating them is not enough. There has to be also a mechanism to ensure that politicians, for example, are not going to hijack one of them, the judiciary, for instance. So the implication is very clear. The implication is, first of all, on the citizen, that is, the administration of justice is negatively affected when the justice system is not independent and is not efficient, because the issues are not only related to independence, they are also related to efficiency. That is one. And then secondly, in the case of Lesotho, the judiciary is one of the 7 sectors that are going to undergo reforms. So it is not like you are the first one to make that assessment. Other people, including experts and including technicians within the judiciary themselves, have noted and acknowledged that the judiciary is not the way it should be. And so that's why it is one of the priority sectors to undergo reforms. And so unfortunately, before those changes have taken effect, the same causes will always produce the same effects until such a time as the rules have changed and mechanisms have been put in place for some of the practices not to be seen again.
Thank you so much for your time.
Okay.
So what we are going to do is, as promised, we are going to do a transcript and then we'll make sure that you get a transcript.
Okay.
Maybe we can get an email address. So
No, I already have it.
you already
He has it.
Thank you.
All right.
All right. Thank you so much for your time.
So